Morning.
In the middle.
Yeah. Hi, Heather.
Hi, good morning.
It was good to see your face.
Yeah, it's good to see yours.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
It was a bit chilly this morning.
It was. I think it was in the 40s this morning.
It was
30s.
37 or 39.
Wow.
The first time
That's
for me in quite a few months.
Yes, it's quite a frost. But then I think Thursday it's supposed to go up to 74. So
Okay, that
yeah.
sounds like autumn.
It does. Yeah. Spring, summer, autumn. Yeah. All mixed. Yeah. Hi, Dan. Are you in Sharon or in Israel? Sharon. Okay.
You're muted, Dan.
Hi, Sarah. There you go, Dan. Hi, Janie.
Hi, Jamie.
Guys.
Anything new?
Not here.
Good news is no news is good news. Oh, I just read there's going to be like a support group starting this Sunday from 11 to 12:30 for people who were feeling traumatized by the trauma. Yeah, it's a combination of 3 synagogues, and it's starting off at Young Israel this Sunday.
Oh.
You'll probably get an email about it.
Probably.
Yeah. It's just like a support group, that's all. Personally, I have to teach Sunday mornings, though. I don't get to go to that stuff.
Where do you teach?
Temple Beth David. It's a Little Reform synagogue in Canton.
Oh, okay, nice.
Yeah, 15 years there. Yeah.
Oh my, wow,
Yeah.
good.
They're very sweet little
Morning.
kids. Hi, Amy.
Hi,
Look
Amy.
how nice your hair is. Woohoo.
Oh, thanks.
How was your trip?
Oh, it was fabulous. Canada was beautiful. We got there just at the end of the foliage season, and Bar Harbor, Maine was great. There's a beautiful little Jewish a synagogue and historical museum in St. John. So I went there, and there's a 92-year-old man giving a tour, and it was so beautiful. I took a picture of a copy of this woman's cholent recipe. I'm going to try that this week.
That's historical. Yeah. Thank
Boker
you.
Tov. Good morning,
Okay,
everyone.
go.
Morning.
Boker or
Wonderful to see everyone here. Thank you for joining. Sorry for the slight delay here, but it sounded like I was walking into an animated conversation about cholent recipes. So,
Yeah, well, it was actually about the cruise. Yeah.
okay. Did anyone make it last night to the gathering on the Boston Common for the Free the Hostages rally?
I didn't
I
hear
didn't
it. I
even know
didn't.
there was one.
I knew there
Okay.
was one, but I haven't heard anything about it. Have you, Rabbi?
Yeah, several people from the community went and reported this morning that they formed a human chain around the Boston Commons and
Oh, good.
Nice.
then went to the steps of the State House to make the voice heard of demanding that the hostages be let go. And they also put like in a, I don't know what to call it. It's like an exhibit is the wrong word, but they hung shirts, like white clothing, for all the hostages on a clothesline through the Boston Commons. So it has like, for the kids that are captive, they have small, clothing with the name, but it's all in white.
Uh,
Is that gonna
That's
stay up or is it gonna be taken down?
I don't know. I've seen pictures of it on social media. I think the intent is for it to stay up to get people's attention and to make people stop and notice and think about what's going on overseas.
Are the
Um,
names in white also? So you
No,
can't really read them?
How can you read it? The
No.
names are in white.
there's I think a tag on each piece of clothing. Dan, did you make it last night to the gathering?
I didn't. I
Okay.
couldn't make it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so I saw
know.
pictures of this.
Mhm.
But indeed, all of our thoughts are still drawn to the hostage situation and the complexities of the state of Israel right now. So, okay, well, let's learn a little bit. And anyone have any specific updates from family or friends in Israel that they'd like to share? Danny, your kids doing okay there?
They're doing okay. They finally kind of went back to school. Turns out
Uh-huh.
that the boys actually could go to school, but the girls can't every day because there's a limit to 300 people gathering in a building. And the school's larger, so they go every other day, and then they fill in the day with a Zoom session when they're not in class, which is certainly not the best, but I guess under the circumstances, the best that can be.
Yeah, that's really tough. Did you end up giving your apartment to a family that was displaced,
We
or
didn't. We didn't. We're happy when we go there to open it up. If anybody wants to come and spend time, it's some issues with former people who were in our apartment. That
okay,
made it difficult.
got it.
We're still hoping to go in a few weeks.
Oh wow, okay. What's the time frame?
We'll be there for 9 weeks,
Okay.
middle November to through January, and we're trying to make arrangements. I signed up for the Army base volunteer program again for several
Okay.
weeks.
Good,
Are they
Dan.
taking volunteers? I know there's like
It's filled through November, so I knew I better get
really?
my reservations in fast. I have a lot of people who are in Israel itself who participate.
Right.
So it's not just foreign people who come in. But
Right.
we'll see what happens.
Yeah, especially now I've heard that so many people are volunteering at army bases and that there's an
Right.
overflow.
Yeah.
So we belong to a few groups that share information about where you can go to help and do things like that. So
Yeah.
we'll see. Hopefully
Okay.
keep busy.
Yeah.
My friend's grandson, a doctor here, volunteered over there, but they said at this point we have more doctors than we need right now, but you'll be on a list in case we do, God forbid, need more medical care.
Yeah.
I have just a little note of solidarity. I was away on a cruise up through Canada and Maine, and so one of the days they do a ceremony where they honor veterans, and then so they honored the veterans, and then after that they do a flag ceremony. So there are people who are part of the crew that and part of the staff that are from like 65 different countries, and they each held up the flags of their countries, and they came out and did dances. So there was somebody holding the flag of Israel. It turns out that there were no Israeli crew members at all. This was a fellow who's an officer. He's actually from Turkey, but he was smiling and proud and holding the Israeli flag. And we were just so happy to see that.
Absolutely.
Mm,
Yeah.
that's heartwarming.
Yeah. Did you ever find out, Rabbi, why the imam didn't come to the rally at the bandstand on the lake?
I did, but that was not the time to go into that. So it's yeah.
It's because my friend in Yonatan, that's in the north in the Golan, and she
Mhm.
said where they really need volunteers right now are on the farms to do the picking.
Yeah.
Mm.
So many people. So if anybody hears of that, you know, anybody who's willing to do that, I can get the information.
Okay. Thank you for letting us know that. There's definitely a labor shortage in several markets right now because so many people are called up and deployed.
And I think a lot of the Thai workers have left.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I,
Yeah, Janie.
you remember Josh Brown? He was a
Oh,
great.
yes.
Yeah, of course. He was a classmate at MIMO for a short while.
So he is on the Southern Front in a tank.
Mhm.
And I have his name if you can add it to the list.
I think it's already on there.
Okay. I
Yeah.
didn't know if it was or not.
Yeah, his
And
mom added it.
just another point of information. I understand that the Altabet's daughter and grandchildren arrived last night or yesterday. They came in from Israel.
Okay. Is there? I assume their son-in-law is also
Called up,
enlisted.
yeah.
Yeah. So, okay.
So-
Where were they living in Israel, Janie?
What?
Where in Israel were they living?
I don't remember. I believe it's someplace in the north,
Oh, okay.
but
Yeah.
wherever it is, you know, Meira brought the kids here.
Yeah.
Lisa was saying last week she was hoping to get the family here because, you know, it's hard for Meira alone with the two kids and the whole situation. The kids are, I think, 3. I think the youngest one is 3. So I don't know if it's 3 and 5, 3 and 6. But you know, they're little.
Yeah.
Sure.
A lot of families have moved while their husbands are or wives are called up, but mostly husbands. I know my brother's area in the south has struggled. It's a religious kibbutz, and they're struggling to make a religious yishuv, and they can't make a minyan on Shabbos because it's all young families. So and all the wives left and went back to their parents' homes.
Yeah.
So well, we have all of them in mind, all of the soldiers and all of the Chatufim, as we learned some Parsha this morning. And I will share screen and also put the link of the source sheet in the chat. And we're going to start with the beginning of Parshat Lech Lecha, which is, of course, one that draws our attention to our homeland. And I want to begin with a simple question, and then we're going to get into some of the commentary and insights of Dr. Vivian Skolnick in her book, The Biblical Path to Psychological Maturity. If you remember last week, we did a character analysis of Noach, who is described as tamim, as whole or complete. And Vivian used the term mature as a trait being associated with being grown up and responsible, that Noach is described in that way of achieving sort of interdependence, achieving a kind of maturity in which he both has a dependence on God and some sort of independence as well, which is this state of interdependence. And that's really the mark of growth and maturity in the sort of seasons of life that a person should be aiming for, both in their relationship with other people and with our Creator. And so there's going to be a similar approach, a similar kind of character analysis that's provided this week to the character of Abraham, as we're first introduced to him through the charge, through the mandate to leave, to pick up from every place that from everything that was familiar, everything that was comfortable, and to go to a foreign place, to a new and different location. And through this, we'll hopefully gain some insight into gaining independence from parents in order to pursue one's own identity, which is also a sign of maturity, is the ability of the child to question the values and ideals of their parents, and to, sort of determine, after questioning, which ones to become committed to by internalizing them and making them their own. And so let's read the psukim, and then we'll come back to some of this psychoanalytic theory. So the first few psukim of our parsha read as follows: Vayomer Hashem el Avram, lech lecha me'artzecha u'mimoladecha u'mibeit avicha el haaretz asher areka. So Hashem says these iconic words: you shall surely go from your land, from your birthplace, from your father's home, to the land that I will show you. And when you get there, I will make you to a great nation. And I will bless you. And I will make your name great. And you will become a blessing. This phrase of "you will become a blessing" is one that I have spoken about often in the past. I think our Parsha class last year was about sort of the verb of becoming a blessing, the act of being a blessing, of what that means to not be the end of a blessing, but to be a channel through which it flows. Whenever we receive, we're meant to pass along. We're not meant to be the ultimate destination of good, but channels through which it flows. And that really comes from from the promise that Hashem made to Abraham, that this is what you're meant to do in life. I'm going to give you a lot of these blessings, but they're not really for you. What you're meant to do with them is to pass them along and to give them to other people, to other nations, and primarily to your children. And that's really the legacy of Abraham Avinu, of becoming a blessing, which is an unusual phrase unless we understand it in this way of actively taking that which we receive and passing it along to others. Va'avarcha, continuing in Pasuk Gimel, Va'avarcha mevarechecha umekalechecha ha'or v'nivrachu b'cha kol mishpachot ha'adama. Right, and so I will bless you. I will bless those that bless you, and I will curse those that curse you, and those that will and people will be blessed through you, all of the families of the earth. Right, so here God is saying that your allies will be my allies, your enemies will be my enemies, and the people who align with you will receive the blessing, right? And we can understand the mechanics of this, because if Abraham's going to be passing along blessing to his friends, and God's going to be pouring in a lot of blessing to Abraham, then all the other nations will be blessed through him. And indeed, we see later on in the Parsha, in the episode of the 4 and 5 kings, that the side that Abraham aligns with with Melchizedek and others, end up being the victors, end up being the ones that are victorious and that reap a lot of spoils of the war. And so we see an example of this later on in the Parsha. So the simple question that I want to begin with is about where Abraham knew to take his first step here. When Abraham was given the command to go, where should he go? Where in this pasuk is he directed to go? If we look at the first pasuk here, what are the directions?
Go to a land I will show you.
Okay, so if I tell you, Janie, I really need something from you, can you go to the place that I'll show you? Where do you take your first step?
Out the door.
Out the door. Okay. And then once you leave your driveway, do you turn right or left?
Wherever
No.
God shows me.
Okay, so it's an act of faith. You start walking, and then you're gonna wait for further instruction, right?
Mhm.
So Abraham just starts going, right? He's living in he started in Ur Kasdim, and he's in a sort of desert area, and he just starts moving and assumes that there'll be some sign, some movement of the clouds, some voice, some signal to direct him where to go. So he just starts walking. He doesn't know where. He just has faith that God will show him where to go.
Well, isn't it interesting, though, that the end of the previous Parsha, he wasn't in Ur Kasdim anymore anyway, because his father had taken the family and they got as far as Haran.
Good. So that's exactly where we're going, Amy. So I'm glad you were paying attention to the end of Parshat Noach. And the maftir for Parshat Noach details exactly what Amy was just describing, that the journey of Abraham to Eretz Canaan actually began through his father. So here are the last two psukim of Parshat Noach, in source number 2 here. Vayikach Terach et Avram beno. Terach took his son, the et Lot ben Haran ben Beno, and also he took Lot, who was the son of, it was his grandson, right? It was the son of Avram's brother Haran. Haran had passed away. The et Sarai Kalato, and Sarai, who was Avraham's wife, right? Eshet Avram Beno, the wife of his son Avram. Vayitzu itam me'or kasdim lalachat arza Canaan. And so, as Amy said, the destination Amy said that Terach already left Ur Kasdim, right? So Avram wasn't really leaving Ur Kasdim, but he was on the way to Eretz Canaan. And then what happened? Vayavo ad Haran, vayeshvu sham. So they went halfway between Ur Kasdim and the land of Israel, and arrived at Haran, and they camped there. V'hiyush yimei terach chamesh shanim u'matayim shana v'yamat terach b'Haran, and he lived to be 205 years, and that's where he died. So why is it that Terach stopped midway in Haran?
He was dying.
Presumably he got sick, right? He had some sort of illness that impeded him from completing the journey that he set out to do, right? We don't know that for sure. The pasuk says vayeshvu sham, that they camped there, they settled there, right? Which seems to be that signals sort of a long-term kind of permanent kind of campment. So was it that they got distracted by something and decided to live there for several years and then Terach died? Or did they stop, the caravan from moving forward because of Haran because of Terach's illness, and they couldn't make it to the final destination because of the illness. We don't really know. It could be one or the other. But what we do know is that Abraham's journey to Eretz Canaan started with his father.
So
Rabbi,
Why was
another question, Rabbi.
Rabbi,
Is there any coincidence to or any relationship to the fact that the son that died, Lot's father, and the name of the city where they settled is the same?
So they're similar, but not the same.
Okay.
So the name of Abraham's brother is Haran. Hey Resh Nun.
Haran.
And
Oh.
the name of the city that they arrived at is Haran. Chet,
I was
Resh
looking at
Nun.
the Duke. I
Yeah.
didn't notice the other.
No, they're very, very similar. So, and, indeed, in the English, they're identical.
Rabbi, my hand is up.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm looking at the verses and I see that the father took Avram before God spoke to Avram. So he must have spoken to God must have spoken to Avram in Haran, that you will go where I want you to go.
Right. That was the point that Amy made, which is that Avram was not in Ur Kasdim when he got the command to go and leave to go to Eretz Canaan. Right. So when the commandment says, Me'artzacha, from your land, u'mimaladcha, me'beit avicha, from the place that you were born, from the place of your father, right? It's a little bit misleading, because it seems to be indicating and pointing to the place where Avram was born, which was Ur Kasdim, right? So the commentators, of course, are bothered by this, and they say that maybe Abraham went back to Ur Kasdim after his father died, right? That's one possibility, and he returned there, and that's when he got the command to continue the journey, essentially, that his father began, right? But typically, we give a lot of credit to Avram for being the one that sort of initiated the first, path, the first settlement, the first journey to Eretz Yisrael. But in fact, what we see from reading the context of the commandment of Lech Lecha is that the story started earlier, and that Avram's father, Terach, even though we don't know of any interaction between Hashem and Terach, already had this pining for Eretz Canaan, already had this plan to get there. And so when Avram said, leave the place that your father's house, right, and go to the place I will show you, Abraham knew to go to Eretz Canaan, because that's where that was already the trajectory of the family.
Well, there's a thing that, there are a lot of good people in this world, and people do good things, and people do mitzvot and everything. But the difference is when Hashem commands it and you do it versus you just doing something on your own. It could end up that you're doing the same thing, but you're not doing it for the same reason. And I think, Terach had started in a world of idolatry, and he is picking up and he is going, but he's not like pure of it. Whereas Abraham was the independent thinker who had found Hashem, and Hashem's talking to him. It's the same thing. Like David HaMelech wanted to build the Beis HaMikdash, but God said, no, you're too involved with the fighting and the war and the blood and everything. It will be your son who carries on and builds it. So it may be similar to that Abraham was the one that God spoke to. Terach was doing something that was good, but it wasn't at God's command. He was doing it because he just figured out to do it. So it wasn't the same mitzvah. It's not the same madriga.
So he might not get the same credit, for doing it, but he still is doing something positive, right?
Yeah.
It seems like Terach is leaving his idolatrous ways. We don't know, but we can, conjecture. Why is he headed towards Eretz Canaan? Right? Terach is a spiritual man according to the Midrash. The Midrash that we all think about in the beginning of Parsha Lech Lecha is Abraham with a baseball bat, smashing the idols and putting the bat in the hand of the last standing idol. And Terach says, what happened? And Abraham says, look, that idol did this. And he said, that's crazy. An idol can't do it. And Abraham said, then why would you worship? Right? So it seems like Abraham in some ways is influencing his father, according to that Midrash, to be on a spiritual journey, to be moving from idolatry towards, ethical monotheism. Right? So it could be that in Terach's later days that he did have some kind of awakening, about a spiritual religious awakening, that he wanted to leave behind the idolatry. But it really wasn't until his son, who really heard the calling, that was able to make that final step, and complete the final stage of the journey. So the analysis that that Dr. Skolnick provides here is one of continuity and discontinuity. We often think of Avram as the iconoclast, as the rebel, right? As that midrash that I just alluded to indicates, that Abraham rejected everything that his father stood for. But through a different lens, we can also appreciate that in some ways, Abraham was a continuation of his father's life, and that he picked up on the path that his father was unable to finish. Right? There was some unfinished business that the last generation had that Abraham picked up on. And this is ultimately a healthy way to think about the transmission of identity from one generation to the next. The Midrash throughout Breshit uses this sort of catchphrase of Maaseh Avot Siman Lebanim, which means that the behavior, the activity, the deeds of the parents create a sign, a signal, an omen for the children. And oftentimes this is used between the patriarchs to show how Yitzchak dug the same wells that Avraham dug, right? Yaakov repeated some of the things that Avraham did in terms of leaving his homeland and needing to return, to Israel. There are lots of patterns and repetitions or motifs that wind their way through the stories of the Avot and the Imahot, right? With the Imahot, the barrenness of Sarah and Rivka, and Rachel, right, is a pattern that repeats itself. And so the rabbis wanted to highlight to us the continuity that exists between the generations as a sign of the positive transmission of identity, of sort of who we are and what we stand for. What Dr. Skolnick does is she places that framework on the relationship between Terach and Avram as well, which is not what Chazal do. Chazal really place it from Avraham and forward. But the simple, straightforward shot of the text, especially if we contrast the end of Parshat Noach and the beginning of Parshat Lech Lecha, forces us to think about Avraham and his relationship with his father. And there are typically, two contrasting views about how Avraham came to believe in God, how he received this commandment of Lech Lecha, and what age he was when this happened. One is that it was sort of an intellectual surveying of the universe that allowed him to arrive at monotheism through his own intelligence, in opposition to the ancient idolatrous beliefs of his father. And so in doing so, it was a rejection of his father and all that he stood for in order to move in another direction. Another view depicts, Terach as an innovator, and he had, the courage to separate from the great, civilization of Ur Kasdim and start a new life for his family in Haran, and already start to move in the direction of Eretz Canaan, and in that way he served as a positive role model for Avram to enable his son, to separate him not only physically but also intellectually. So, did Abraham, develop this belief at a much later age, and was it sort of as sort of individuation from his father, or was he looking at his father, who was a bit of a experimenter, a bit of an independent thinker, and that was a role model for Abraham from a very young age for thinking for himself and for discovering his own path. And if we take the latter view, that really Terach served as a precedent, as a inspiration, as a role model for Abraham, then from a psychological perspective, it makes sense that Abraham would be willing to heed the call of Hashem to go, of Lech Lecha, and to chart out your own path, just like your father charted his. So too you should chart your own. You have the opportunity to rely on your own inner resources rather than continue your sort of childhood and teenage existence. And here I'll just quote a paragraph from Dr. Skolnick, who says that the development of faith and the God image from childhood to adulthood develops most significantly in the stage of adolescence, because the adolescent begins to form images and ideas about God that are independent of the introjected parental image. To be able to think and question allows the adolescent to filter parental values through their own psyche, which then becomes their own, even though they may or may not be identical to parental values. The ability to think, question, and process in an environment of freedom allows the adolescent to feel separate enough that whatever conclusions they draw, they are their own and not a childish repetition of someone else's ideals. When an adolescent has to live up to someone else's ideals, which are not congruent with own, that is often a sense of shame. And this sort of serves as a lens through which to appreciate Abraham's relationship with his father, that there was both some congruence and some lack of congruence, meaning to say that the Maaseh Avot Siman Levanim is that there is parental influence. That's the, it's a sign or a model, but it's up to the individual to move beyond that sign towards maturity. And maturity means that when a child or even an adult can move past the influences of their parents and make it their own, right? And sometimes that comes through a stage of rejection or rebellion or individuation, but hopefully that leads to a reacceptance of those same values in a child's or young adult's own way. And so there's a lot of psychological wisdom in appreciating Abraham's continuity and discontinuity from his parents as father actually being a healthy thing. That it's a positive that Abraham is willing to pick up from where his father left off and do it in both a similar but also different way. That's what sort of interdependence really means. If we're thinking about maturity from a psychological perspective, it's the ability to both take from the past generation and to make it one's own. And so that's sort of a different way to appreciate Abraham's journey of Lech Lecha, that he's not starting from scratch. that he comes from somewhere. And oftentimes we assume that Abraham is the first Jew. We give him all the credit, and we put a lot of emphasis on him being, the first one. But we have to appreciate that the Torah goes out of its way to give us the biographical, intergenerational, details of Abraham's life, so we can appreciate that he comes from somewhere, and that influence of his father had a positive result, whether it was to reject it completely or whether it was to reject it and then, integrate pieces of it into his own whole, sort of mature religious identity. Janice, I see your hand is up. Go ahead.
Thank you. I just read that the Torah doesn't actually say that Terach was an idol worshiper. It mainly comes from Midrash.
100% comes from Midrash.
What,
Right?
Rabbi?
It 100% comes
Oh,
from
yes,
Midrash.
yes.
Yep.
So I found that interesting to think about, that the Torah doesn't say he was an idol worshiper. I don't know
Indeed.
why Midrash says that necessarily, because perhaps, as you say, perhaps that was an underlying idea or feeling in Terach's mind about monotheism that may have
Yep.
subtly passed to Abraham.
Indeed. I think part of the reason that the Midrash makes Terach out to be such a bad guy is to make Abraham such a good guy.
Oh, thank you.
Right?
That makes sense.
Oftentimes, that's what Chazal will do to emphasize, the greatness of someone by contrasting it with where they came from, or, like a sibling, for instance, whether it's Yishmael, and Yitzchak, or Esav and Yaakov, sort of providing a foil which allows us to appreciate the saintliness of one over the other. But we have to appreciate that there's a purpose to that. But the pshat of the text signals differently on many of those occasions. So while we do lean on the lens of Chazal and how they understood characters, we also have to appreciate that they were commentators and that they were giving approaches to the text as a layer. But we should need to start with the simple, straightforward understanding of the text, which is that Terach is not a bad guy.
Yeah, right. Thank you. Yeah.
And so, and it's okay for Abraham to be someone who takes from his father as opposed to rejects completely his father. And that's actually a healthier model of identity formation than an absolute rejection of parent, right?
I agree. Yes.
And so that's, where the, this sort of continuity and discontinuity piece comes in from a developmental standpoint. To see the Ma'aseh Avot Siman Labanim, not just from Abraham to Yitzchak to Yaakov and beyond, but even for Abraham himself, the activity and the decisions of his father Terach set him up as well. So it helps us sort of take that model or that schema one generation back from where we're used to applying it.
Thank you.
What is also making me think about is looking at the relationship between Avram and his father, in that when he destroyed the idols, you always think, oh, his father was going to be very angry, but they may have had the kind of relationship where they, it was a good relationship and they talked, and he may have known that by putting the club or whatever it was in the other idol's hands, that his father would also be reacting not as negatively as we're led to believe, but that he may have thought that his father would appreciate what he was doing, the whole effect of it.
Right. Indeed. This allows us to appreciate that as more of a back and forth and less as a violent kind of rebellion. Sarah Leah.
just to one further from like the second model, like maybe Terach's tikkun was like, it's like a chesed for Abraham, that he doesn't have to start, like Hashem says, go, but that's really scary. Like, what do you mean go on my own? He was already out of his house and he started the journey with his father.
Mm,
And that makes it a little bit less intimidating. It's not like he's starting from like square one. He's like already going on the path.
right. He's already midway, right?
Mhm.
And so when Abraham receives this command of Lech Lecha, go me'artzacha u'mimoladetcha me'beit avicha, right? It's not a leaving behind everything, but it's actually sort of looking at stages of development in his life in which he was accompanied by his father for some of them. And
Yeah.
so he's not going about it alone, but in some ways he's actually, taking his father with him symbolically, but, very literally, he's picking up from where his father left off.
Yeah, it's a chesed. There's like a chesed aspect because we're often all afraid of the unknown. And if somebody could go with us, at least to start, and then we're pushed in the direction.
Right. So in some ways, Abraham is accompanied, by his father because his father started the path.
Yeah.
And so, indeed, it's scary when we think that we're doing things totally on our own, but we can appreciate that those came before us, sort of set the direction. Then they're actually, joining with us as we continue, their footsteps.
The other thing is that we know that Avram is close with
Yes,
his
speak.
family because he has followed Terach. His wife comes from his family, and he's taking his nephew with him. And when he goes to look for a wife for Yitzhak, so many chapters later, he says, go back to my family and find somebody from there. I don't want, any of these locals. So there's something about the whole family that where there's a sense of something that's different or special in the whole family. It's not just him in a vacuum.
Right. This is not a narrative of Abraham running away and abandoning his family. And sometimes it's a mistake when we think of it as being such. And the notion that he took, his nephew and he was very careful about sustaining the nuclear family indicates, underscores exactly that point, that he was not running away from his father, but in some ways, as Saralea and as you're sharing, Amy, he was carrying his father and his father's legacy with him as he made the final sort of passage to Eretz Yisrael. John.
I'm trying to understand a little bit about Terah. How old was Terah when they moved to Haran?
We don't know the timeline. We only
And
know
was
how
he-
old
and
he
was Ter-
was when he passed.
Yeah, and was when Abraham left, was Terah still alive or not?
From the chronology of the Torah, it seems that Terach had passed, and that's when Abraham left. So it could be that Abraham wanted to stay with his father, who might have been ill, and that's why he did not leave him behind.
So part of what I was trying to ask is how long was Abraham and Terach in Haran?
Yeah, it's a fair question, and we don't know from the shot of the text. There is a midrash called Seder Ha'olam, which tries to create a chronological sort of time chart of the Torah, but there are gaps that are sort of present, but I would have to look there to get a better sense of how long they were there for. But that would definitely make a difference in terms of all of these dynamics of identity. And so it is an important question. Janie.
So something else that came to mind when Sarah Leah was talking or following up on that is from the text, all we know is that Terach had started the journey and Abraham was still in Haran. And he may have needed that push because if his father died, he may have been grieving and in a state of, immobility. And he may have needed that push from Hashem to continue on.
Yeah. That's another
Maybe,
way of looking at it,
yeah,
which I think allows us to give Haran more, not Haran, Terach more credit, right? That Terach wanted Abraham to go, but he got stuck for whatever reason in Haran, and Abraham was stuck there too. Especially if he ended up going back to Ur Kasdim, which is why the command says, "Leave your birthplace, leave your father's house." Right? It could be that Abraham might have been almost stuck in his father's, sort of model and his father's legacy and his father's image. And he needed that push to actually become more independent, to break off a little bit and to go forward.
That also would lead to showing a very strong relationship between Avram and his father.
Indeed. I like that interpretation.
Rabbi,
Janice.
that
and then
maybe,
Monica.
thank you, as we were talking before, that possibly Avram returned to Ur Kasdim. Maybe it was to return the father's body to bury him there, where his birthplace, to give him that respect and then start the travel again.
Possibly.
From God's message.
Monica.
Yeah, I always liked, and I wonder what your thoughts are about the other meaning of Lech Lecha, kind of, so other than go forth, go to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it's just so wonderful the way that this whole parsha is so symbolic, because there's definitely the journey, the physical journey, like leaving the actual home and separating from the parents and going from this town to this other region. But that journey within, and all his growth, and the way just how symbolic it is, like you're not just physically walking away, but also he's also finding himself and finding all these and developing as a human being, and having all these all this knowledge and gifts to share with the world. Anyway,
Indeed, that's beautiful. And I have to share that over the last few days, I joined the Schwartz family in the Phoenix, and in the Grand Canyon. We did a 20-mile hike to raise money for One Family Fund. It's an annual tradition that the Schwartz family has on Ezra's birthday every year. I brought along with me a book from John Muir, who was a naturalist who really started the national park movement in America. And one of his quotes is that going into nature is going into yourself. And walking through nature and hiking through nature is really less about the physical movement forward, upwards, or downwards. It's really the movement inwards that matters. And so, as much as Abraham was moving physically, this was a journey about moving, internally into his own innards, to really unpack who he was, what he stood for, and what he was willing to live for. And sometimes when we go on a journey is when we discover who we are, right? And that's a lot of what, the whole notion of Aliyah L'Regel, of going on a pilgrimage, right? 3 times a year. You discover a lot about yourself when you're out of your comfort, right? You learn about, what frustrates you and what your temperament is like. You really, sort of encounter your raw self. And so indeed, it's the Baal Shem Tov who says that Lech Lecha is go into yourself, right? That this wasn't even a physical journey, that this repetition of the word, it could have just said Lech, go. But the Lech Lecha is really that Abraham is being told by Hashem, you need to delve deeper into yourself in order to get where you need to go in life, right? You need to peel away the layers and really uncover your essence, and then you'll know where you belong. So it's a beautiful, explanation, and I appreciate you, referencing it, Monica, and thank you. Okay, well, I really appreciate everyone's insights and commentary this week. Definitely learned a lot from all of the conversation that we had. And I look forward to continuing that conversation next week for Parshat Vayera.
Well,
Chayei
welcome
Sarah.
back. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, there's Vayera and then Chayei Sarah. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Well, have a great day, everyone, and sending strength to everyone in Israel and to us as well. We need it.
Yes.
Amen.
Amen. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.